I think you're going to like this episode. We talked a lot about Lazina and some of her life experiences, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. This was the kind of conversation that could have turned into so many more conversations. Some focal points were brown people, white people, how that works, perhaps certain first impressions that people made to get wrong, missed opportunities, assumptions. I think it's worth listening to. I think you should check it out and you should share it with a friend. Thank you for supporting the Lifestyle Chase as it grows, as more people check it out, and as more people check out the other episodes. We referenced a few past guests, and it's definitely worth listening to those episodes as well. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the Lifestyle Chase, Season 2. This podcast features high performers who have found a way to live their best life while balancing their health, wellness, friends, and family. I'm your host, Chris Little. Let's get started. The Lifestyle Chase is brought to you by Yeg Fitness. Yeg Fitness is Edmonton, Alberta, Canada's healthy lifestyle community, creating and supporting active living for all. Check them out online at yegfitness.ca and on social media at Yeg Fitness. All right, so welcome to episode 101. Today I am joined by Lazina McKenzie. How are you doing?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm in your fancy house. You've served me tea. I have no complaints.
Well, I'm glad you're here. The first time we're meeting in my condo. It's great.
Yeah. So, what was your routine today? We talked about how you went to November Project. What did you do? What was your favorite part?
Well, so today's a holiday, and it was kind of it's always a big deal on holiday days for November Project to wake up. Just because you got 3 days, right? I could have done something different last night, but I went to bed early. I usually wake up at about 5:15 on November Project mornings. It was pretty chilly this morning, it's about minus 18, so it was a lot of layers. And I wear extra layers on my hands and on my feet, so it just takes a little bit of extra layering, right? So it takes a little bit of extra time. And then I usually leave. I head out the back alleyway here, so we're facing 104th Street. And then off I go. And usually when I run through this parking lot in the back, every single time I leave is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 a.m. It's a half an hour workout. And I usually run through the back alleyway into that parking lot right there. And I'm like, you're a badass. And it's just a nice little pep, right? Like it kind of just gets you in that mind frame. And mindset is just really important to get up, especially when it's almost minus 20 and really dark outside, to get yourself going. So that's what I do as I leave the back alleyway every single time. You're badass. Maybe I swear in there. And then off I went to go run. And this morning's a special day. It's a holiday for us, so we can stick around a little bit longer. And so we met on the corner by Walterdale Bridge here in Edmonton, and we ran 6K. So we call it the Sunrise 6K. There was no sun because it's still very dark in the morning, and off we went. So it doesn't matter how fast, how slow you walk or run. It doesn't matter. At the end, because it's a holiday day, we wait for everybody. So the really, really speedy people, they go and come back. So it's 3K out, 3K back. And then we wait. We wait for everybody to come in. So it's kind of fun. You got to bring an extra couple layers so that you can stand out in minus 18 after you're all sweaty and be comfortable. And then everybody, well, not everybody, a ton of people go and have breakfast after. So we all ram into a Denny's, and it's kind of weird because it's 30 something of us at 7:15 in the morning. And we go have breakfast together. It's a nice way to start a vacation day or a holiday day.
Well, I think just any day at all, because there's a lot of people who start their day and they don't know what it's like to start their day that way.
It's a really great way to start the day. So I started going to November Project June 2014, and I didn't know anybody. And I actually thought this was an unusual story. I actually confirmed 2 weekends ago. I was sharing a talk on why I run at Lululemon 2 weekends ago, and I actually asked people, because there was a few November Project people, did you just go for the first time on your own? I thought this was an abnormal story to just go to November Project on my own. A friend didn't take me. I probably just heard it on the radio or heard Andrew listen to his tweets or read his tweet or whatever, and I just went. So this is not an uncommon story, apparently. I thought I was unusual and very unique. I'm not. So yeah, I showed up June 2014, and I didn't know what this was. I showed up at Commonwealth Stadium, football stadium, and we just run the stairs around the entire stadium. It's quite fun. It feels intimidating when you walk in, and the first time you're there, it feels kind of culty. Everyone's wearing a spray painted t-shirt that says November Project, and I didn't have one, and day one, and you're like, what the hell is this all about? And everyone starts bouncing and they're screaming fuck yeah in the morning, and it was fun. Like, it was actually really, really fun that first day. Everyone was like high-fiving. There was lots of sweaty hugs. It was June, so it was like warm, and everyone was like pouring, like dripping at the end of stairs. And like people just grab you. It doesn't matter how sweaty they are. They just grab you. Yeah. And I think I was just hooked after day one. And I didn't go with anybody. I didn't really tell friends. I just went. I think I just needed something different. I was going through some hard stuff in life too, which we can talk about too. But I just needed something different. So I started going, and I would say the first 2 years I was very on and off with going. I was going through some health stuff, so I couldn't be as physically active as I wanted to. And I also, once you hit the dark months of November Project, it takes a lot of mental toughness, which turns out now I have. But I don't think I quite had that, or I didn't think I had that at that time. But yeah, no, it's a really awesome way to start the day. I wish it was every day, not just Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm sure our colleagues of November Project may not want that. It's a lot of work on them, and they do a fantastic job. But yeah, it's a really nice way to start the day. And then literally by 6:45, I'm back here, take a shower, get ready, have breakfast, and you're off to work.
Good to go.
Like, such a nice way to start the day.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, for anybody who does not know who you are, because I've got listeners that might not necessarily be from Edmonton.
Yeah.
Describe yourself. Pretend you're doing an icebreaker at a party. How would you describe yourself? What things stand out to you about you to you, you know?
Okay, so how would I describe myself? I think I'm someone who, I actually know this. I've done work in this space on myself. I'm a connector. I like to connect people together, different ideas together, different opportunities together. And it just comes natural to me that you tell me something, and in my head, I have like 15 ideas of how I connect you to like what or who to whatever it is that you've just told me about. I just can't help it. So maybe I should have been a recruiter or a matchmaker or something like that. But that is like my strongest skill set. And I've been like that for as long as I can remember. I just like to connect things together. And usually it has nothing to do with me, and it's not self-serving like whatsoever. I just like to connect people together. So that's what I would say is like kind of the biggest thing about like who is me, who is Lazina. Like, I like to connect people together. I found that another thing I would say about myself, I found that over the last like a number of years now, I really like building community. And that means it means lots of things to lots of people, and it's not necessarily about the place that you live in. But I do, and I think no matter where I lived, I would probably take the same approach. I really like connecting, because I like connecting things together. I like to create community around myself. And that could be in fitness, that could be like just being a downtown resident and trying to build more community that way. It could be in the work that I do. I think that's a big part of like that makes me who I am. What would be another thing that I would say about me? I really care about my family. I'm quite a family-oriented person. In my immediate, like, little family, it's just my husband and I. And we still consider ourselves, like, a very full, like, very loud, boisterous, like, full family, even though there's only two of us. And then I do have a very, very ginormous, like, gigantic extended family. None of them are here. I'm from Toronto originally, so my family's not here. But I feel like I still stay pretty connected to my immediate family, like my parents, my sisters, like that family. And not as connected with the giant family as much as I want to, but as soon as you get back together, you're one and the same again. It's fine that way. But I would say those are the kind of the big things that make me who I am. And maybe one other thing I will add to that, I really like to create and build things. And as long as I can be as creative and innovative as I want, meaning that there's not much of a box around me, I find that I'm fairly successful in being able to build something, whatever that thing is. So not really having much of a box around being able to build, I think, has been important, which is maybe why I've chosen for many years to be an entrepreneur, why that's been important to me. Yeah, those would be a few things, I would say.
I like it.
There you go.
So with connecting people and bringing people together, what's the most recent example that stands out, or at least the most like prolific example that stands out to you?
Of connecting people together. So I can actually talk about a really exciting thing. So recently, in the last year, moved away from being an entrepreneur, which is very different and a little bit of an identity crisis, though I think I've managed through that pretty well, to working to support entrepreneurs. So I run a mentorship program for entrepreneurs at the University of Alberta called the Threshold Impact Venture Mentoring Service, and we shorten that to VMS. And one of the things, because I do think I'm a community builder and a connector, is I want to as much as possible. What we do in this program is we provide mentors who are amazing people in our city who have volunteered their time, their talent, and their expertise to support and help entrepreneurs who are up and coming and are trying to scale something, into something giant. And so that's the gist of the program. And so in terms of being able to connect things together, I really care about providing as much support and opportunity to our entrepreneurs as possible. So if that means I have to wear a little bit of my own PR hat to help them because I want to connect them to something, I do. Or if it means creating learning opportunities within the context of our program, I do, because I just care about connecting like a learning experience or learning opportunity to a person in this situation, or connecting some of our entrepreneurs to other mentors. There's a pool, over 100 people that have put their hands up to be mentors in this program, just in this one city alone. It's pretty amazing that way. So that would be, to me, more recently of continuing to connect. And I find I'm in the very early stages of this, of continuing to build community that already exists there. This program is 7 years old at our school. It originally came from MIT 20 years ago, but it's 7 years old at this university here. And I feel like I'm just at the beginning of continuing to make those connections and more importantly, build community around this mentorship program.
What was the moment that created that opportunity for you?
Of making this switch into this kind of work? So there's lots of things. So this is kind of a long answer. So how did I transition out of what I was doing into this?
Sure.
So it's 2020. In 2017, I went through some heavy health stuff. Not just one thing, but two major things that I went through, and it made me have to pause. Especially the second thing that I went to, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I don't know do you know what that is?
Roughly.
Okay, so I had heard this term when I was diagnosed with this. It was July 28th, 2017. And I'd heard this term, but I didn't know anything about it. I actually knew one person who had it before me. But I didn't really know anything about it. So I heard this is what it was. I was diagnosed with this. It's an autoimmune disease. I'm like, what is that? I've heard that term too, but what does that actually mean? And what it meant, so it was this diagnosis was made. I had to learn what these new words were. But what it actually was, physically every day, is I couldn't really move. I couldn't move my hands. I couldn't really move my feet. I couldn't move my knees. I was just having trouble doing things. And I can share some examples, some really little things like squeezing toothpaste on my toothbrush, or I have oatmeal in the morning, every single morning, like breaking walnuts and putting them in my oatmeal. I couldn't use my hands. Putting my earrings on, literally anything where it's small, fine things. So I kind of had to pause on just life in general. This is a very long story to get to your answer, but it'll get there.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to pause. I had to take some health moments, and it was more like a half a year of some health moments of kind of recouping that way. I went on pharmaceuticals immediately. Will save, if you have an autoimmune disease, pharmaceuticals generally will save your life and provide quality of life for you as a person. And then I had to learn to live with this chronic disease. And part of that time, that's 6 months, it ended up being probably 8 to 9 months. I was not fully on hold with my business, but I kind of was. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even do my shoelaces. You can't do anything. So I had to pause. And a lot of that time of pausing made me think now that I have to think about health first before thinking growing a business, to think about how am I, Lazina, going to move forward as a person, just period, period. That's it. I started thinking what do I want? Who am I? What makes me happy? I kind of done a lot of the work of who am I? I'm in my late 30s. I'm in my last year of my 30s. So I've done a lot of the who am I work. So I didn't really have those kinds of questions of myself, but it's more what gives me happiness? What do I want to do next? And so I spent a good chunk of 2018 kind of answering that for myself of what do I want to do next? And I took on some contract work. Professionally, my background is in change management, which has nothing to do with a style and personal branding business, which is what I had before, but I came from a management consulting world professionally before that. So I took on a little bit of work there, and by the end of 2018, I had, because I'm a connector and I really care about community, I reached out to my network. For the first time ever, I reached out to my network for me, not to connect people together, which is what I usually use my network for. Be hey, person A is looking to do something. Let's connect you together. That's usually what I do. But I for the first time, I reached out to my network for me and was exploring what do you think I'm good at? What do you think I should do next? What are some opportunities out there? And it wasn't you know, do you have a job for me? That's not at all what I was doing. It's more coffee chats with people to find out, like, and explore, like, what's out there, especially in a small city that we live in. There's lots of opportunity here, but probably not as much as if you were in Toronto or New York, or if you're in Istanbul, or like a big, huge city, right?
Yeah.
Though there's a lot of opportunity here. I don't mean to minimize that. So I spent a lot of time doing that, and I had like pretty solid opportunities, many, like handfuls of opportunities in front of me at the end of that year. And it was interesting to see what people thought I was good at, because I think I'm pretty certain I know what my strong skill sets are, but it was interesting to see what people in my network, personally and professionally, have picked up from me. And that's a little bit of how I transitioned. And the way that I picked because I could have picked different opportunities, I first led with like what is going to make my health happy, what's going to make me like satisfied professionally, where I can continue to grow, and like I'm very ambitious. How do I sort of fulfill that for as long as I'm interested in doing this work, which I can imagine is going to be quite a bit of time. I'm happy that way. So I needed to first and foremost think about that. So that's a very long answer to your question, but that's kind of that's the journey that got me to where I am right now. I kind of glossed over a lot of stuff there. Maybe we'll get into that, but yeah, that's how I got to this new opportunity that's almost a year old now. It still feels brand new though.
Yeah, well, I mean, like,
I love it.
it's good because you alluded to the whole like getting other people to identify your strengths, which is like, I did some research for people who are looking to find a new job. You need to ask the people around you what they think your strengths are, because sometimes we're not very good at addressing our own strengths.
For sure. I also had a friend who she owns a recruiting business, and she was very generous of her. She did a personality assessment on me, which I've done lots before, but it's from a career development perspective. So it's interesting to get this report back. You answer a number of questions to get this back and see, like, what does this say? And so some of the opportunities lined up really nicely with what, you know, just on paper, what this report said about me. And yeah, no, it was really interesting that way. One thing, have you ever done this? One thing I want to do for myself, I've never done this before. I know you can formally do this, like buy whatever the software tool to be able to do this, is to do my own 360 assessment. I think I could use SurveyMonkey or Google Forms or whatever, and just ask a number of questions and send it out send it out to your network, but ask them to anonymously answer like stuff about you personally, professionally, you know, where you want to go in your life. Just ask people you know in your life to like give you some feedback on yourself. And if they don't write their name down, it's kind of nice to get like real honest feedback. Well, like, what do people actually think about you? What is your brand in the marketplace? What kind of skill sets do people think you're strong at? You know, so where are some weaknesses that either you work on, or I don't necessarily think you always need to work on your weaknesses. Like, what are the things that are awesome about you? Keep doing those.
Well, that's so true, because like a person is going to have trouble progressing if all their attention is focused on the things that they're weakest at, versus if they refine it and focus on the things that they're strong at.
I think so. I mean, I also think like the things that you're not awesome at, like you can hire somebody to do those things for you. Just do the things that make you amazing, because that gives you energy. That's your genius. Like, that would be an interesting thing to do, like create your own 360.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like those Instagram questions, sometimes I'll ever just a little bit. I'm like, why do you guys follow me? Like,
yeah.
Oh, he's positive. I'm like, sweet.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Does that show you who said that?
If you put out like the question, then it'll show.
It'll attribute their name to comment. Oh, okay,
cool. I got a lot of nice people that follow me, so it's like it pumps my tires.
That's so nice.
But I'm gonna segue, because it got me thinking. What's the most negative feedback that you've ever received? Because I know everybody receives it. We all get it in different ways and different points in our life. What's it been for you? Yeah,
it's been a very long time, so that makes me think that people are not being honest with me, because nobody's awesome all the time. But, you know, it was a number of years ago. It was in my first job. I remember the two people that gave me this feedback. It was constructive criticism. It wasn't like, you suck. It wasn't that kind of feedback. So I moved to this city 13 years ago, 2006, to do my MBA. And then I went straight into management consulting. So I had that kind of role for a while. And I'd never worked in an office before. I was a personal trainer long ago when I was in my early 20s. So I'd built a small little training business, and then a very good family friend of mine was like, go and do your MBA. And then I thought about more of that. Anyways, blah, blah, blah. Went down the MBA route, and then I started in consulting. So that was the first time I'd ever worked in an office environment. And I'd never worked in that kind of business where it's a lot of brain work. Like you're doing a lot of consulting work. Most of it was public sector work. on behalf of the government, and you're helping them build strategies and change management documents. And yeah, so it was a lot of stuff that I'd never really done before. Business school does give you some foundation, but like consulting is like, yeah, that's its own school. Learning how to go through that. And so this negative feedback, or this, I would call it constructive feedback, it actually has really shaped a lot of my thinking for work since then. And that was probably 2008 or 9. That feedback was given, and it was given by two women that I was working on their team. And it was structured in a way where, like, here's some of the direction we want to go on a project. Here's some of the work that you're doing. Here's maybe where we see room for improvement or some gaps, and let's have a conversation about it. And so I immediately got defensive, like people do. Even though in your head you pretend that you don't get this way, like people get defensive. We're human beings. And that was a different time in my life where, as I say, I'm in my late 30s now. I was in my like late 20s then, mid to late 20s then. So I've grown a lot. But at that time, I immediately got defensive. I appreciated that was given to me in writing, which was done purposely, which I think is a great approach. And that's what I'm saying, that was foundational in my life. I've used that approach since. I think it's really nice to list something out in okay, we might have conflict over this, but let's list out, like, here's what's going on. Here's where there's some room for growth based on what you're doing, and how do we move forward together. It was a really, really, really amazing learning opportunity for me. And I've never forgotten that bit of learning opportunity. And those two people are important to in my life to this day. So I would say that was a negative piece of feedback, but in terms of like the wording that you use, but it was constructive feedback that's, I don't know, fueled my thinking and really shaped how I think about service to clients, whatever your client is, doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah. Well, I like that way of seeing it, because I think a lot of us, we get trolls, we get haters, we get just instances where we might be going in for an evaluation, like a quarterly review or something like that. We can let that beat us down and just stay down.
Yeah.
Or we can let that shape us into growing our empire, or whatever that is.
Well, and so 100%. So at that time, it was nice to get it in writing. So I was like, okay, I can think about this. And I'm like, well, why are these two wonderful people that I worked with, why are they sending this to me? Like, you could easily just write me off, or whoever was going through, you could just not tell them and then move on and cut them out of a project situation. Or you could take time to like teach and mentor someone who's still learning. And that's what they chose to do. So I was like, well, why are they doing this? Well, clearly I have potential and they can see that. So maybe I just need, a couple of veils pulled off so I can see what's in front of me and work through that. So yeah, I think it's a matter of asking the why. Like, why is someone actually taking time and effort to write a long email and share, like, in a very laid out, thoughtful way, like, here's some things that we think and how do we move forward together? Like, that's important.
Yeah, it's so true. It's such a good reflection to take on just feedback in general.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the gym might receive positive feedback. Somebody might be like, hey, nice arms. And that person like, they didn't really mean nice arms. It's like, no, like, you have to hear that. Because they're not just going to wake up in the morning and be like, I'm just going to tell Bob from the gym that he's got nice arms. I'm just going to do that. I've got just an agenda to tell people they have nice arms today. No, if you see it, you call it out. And so people need to receive both negative and positive, but especially positive, because people are hard on themselves. Like, maybe not everybody, but I would say probably 80% of people listening to podcasts are inherently hard on themselves.
I don't take positive feedback well. I just get embarrassed. I can think of a few instances recently where people have complimented various things. Do you get this way too? And I just get like flustered and embarrassed. I rather, whatever it is, it's usually the work, whether it's like professional work or like side hustles or passion projects kind of work. I'd rather the work just speak for itself and me personally not be acknowledged. If I'm like creating, so I'll talk about this, I'm sure we'll talk about like, what does community building mean to me? Because that is a piece of me. When I do some of that work, I would rather that be recognized and not like, well, congrats, Lazina, you did this great thing. It's so embarrassing. Do you get that way?
I would say, like, we even experienced that before we pressed record today. Like, we were doing our intros to each other, and you're like, oh yeah, you're making the fitness industry. Like, what? And it's just like,
totally.
For me, I just kind of think about it as like, just like 1,000 other people in the city, I do personal training. And just like about 150 other people in the city, I have a fitness podcast. and I just try and stay alive and put out my good message and hope for the best.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah, we all have this.
Yeah, it's just like that. That's why personal growth is such a trend these days, and just that self-reflection. And it's not a bad thing. It's people are a little bit more self-aware and they recognize things, and perhaps it is that lack of community in their life where they're needing to get community in some form. So they're looking for it in like a podcast or a book or like a video or whatever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree.
When we talk about community, what's the furthest you've ever been from feeling a sense of community?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, I can think of some. I'm going to reach very, very far back to when I was a kid. So I'm very lucky. My sisters. I'm the middle of 3 daughters. My sisters and I are the lucky recipients of very forward-thinking brown parents. I didn't have a typical, and I say typical because I've asked a lot of people who come from the kind of background that I come from. I did not have that typical story where, as a child of people who have immigrated to this country, I got to do a lot. I got to like learn a lot, and that's because my parents, they were young. My mom was 19 when she had my older sister. So they themselves were children, like learning how to be parents in a brand new place, and trying to build a life for themselves. And so being the lucky recipient, what I mean of like their love, their hard work, their sweat, their tears, or all of that stuff that you put into raising children, we got to do a lot of things that I would say very honestly, like all the other white kids that I grew up with were doing. Like I learned how to ski when I was a kid. I'm brown. That doesn't happen very often. And so this is the example I will share with you. That so growing up, I'm from Toronto originally. We used to go to Vermont most years for March break with a group that my dad used to work with, some people that he worked with, their whole families, and we all used to go in this convoy to Vermont every single year for March break. And we were the only brown family that was there, and my parents didn't care about that at all. Like they did not notice that. They didn't care. Even skiing, like we used to go to Killington, Vermont. They didn't really. I'm sure they noticed, but they never mentioned it to us that, wow, we are the only non-white people here. There's usually a token Asian family and like one black guy, but and it's all white people. And so that for me, I've talked about this and reflected on this a lot from that point in my life till now, that you kind of feel like an outsider. And I know my parents never talked about it to us because they didn't want us to ever feel like that. No matter what we did, they never wanted us to feel like we were not doing what every other kid was doing, and they didn't care about the color of those kids. So I was very lucky that way that I didn't have to think about those things. But you do notice it when you're like the only one of your ethnicity doing something, and yeah, like you just notice it. And like as a result of all of that hard work and sweat and tears and all that kind of stuff, I'm a really damn good skier. But it feels weird when you're a kid, when all the other kids that, especially in that group we went with, like they were all like amazing skiers and we were just learning. So it's weird because you're at this different level, and you're also like, okay, I'm like this little brown kid. Like, of course you're really good because you're like, you know, you're a white guy. But that's just not how, in reality, that's not how it is for us. But I would say that's the time for me when I felt like a little bit of an outsider and not that true sense of community. And that was probably just like us in our own heads. Like, I'm sure no one made us feel like an outsider because we went with like probably many families. There were probably like 30 of us that went together. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a natural thing to feel because, like, that's just, it's reality. There are cultural differences. There are, like, just, we're going to find ourselves in situations, and sometimes people forget that people are people. Sometimes people emphasize that people are people, which is what I like about your experience, is that it was just like, yeah, we're just going skiing. Like,
yeah, they didn't care about that at all.
Yeah. If you had somebody else that experienced the exact opposite scenario, what kind of words of encouragement would you give them?
Yeah, so I do think about this a lot. I've talked about it a lot. I ask cousins, I ask family, friends. Like, I just text people, like, what do you think about this? Because usually, as soon as you start, I feel like when you start doing something, you kind of rise to a certain level of it. Being an ethnic minority, you're kind of like the first one doing it. And it's not, I know that's not true. But it feels that way when there's everyone around you is white doing it. So one thing I would say, and again, this is just the way I was raised. I'm very lucky I was raised the way that I was, is that I think people put limitations on themselves I'm going to share something that I might get in trouble for saying. But I think people put cultural limitations on themselves. And so I know that this is often said to me, and I don't know if it's said to my sisters. I should ask them if this is ever said to them. But people always, not always, people have said over the course of my life that you're really whitewashed, or that you're a coconut. I'm sure people listening, especially if they're brown, they've heard these terms before. And so what that means is like, do people just think I'm white because I ski? Like, or that I know how to play tennis very well? Like I got scholarships to go to the States when I was a teenager to go play tennis. Or that I used to play the violin when I was a kid. Like my parents made us do these kinds of things so that we became well-rounded people. But I throw it back at people. I only the last 2 years I've been throwing this back at people when people call me whitewashed. I'm like, well, does that mean that you're brownwashed? Like, is there a cultural limitation that you put on yourself that limits you from doing all of these things that you want to do, like climbing to the top of a mountain, which you never see brown people. You do, I guess, if you're like in India or if you're somewhere in Africa and there's like large mountains, like you do see that, obviously. I'm talking about where we live. But I think that's something that I throw back at people to say, like, why would you put those limitations on yourself? There's no reason why you can't ski. It's cold outside. Well, dress for it. Like, there's no reason why you can't do certain things. And maybe that's what my parents taught us all along without saying it or calling it out. Like, yeah, we're the only brown people on the hill. Who cares? And it doesn't even matter. Just go ski.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something that a person can take away from it, is it's just like sometimes you might have to be really loud about just going and doing the thing. Like sometimes you might just have to be really assertive with just living your life just like anybody else would. But there's no reason why you shouldn't. Right.
But it is a cultural limitation. Why don't you see? And I'm trying to have more of this conversation, and maybe it is just the city that we live in. Maybe it's certain parts of cities that we live in. I'm not sure, but like, why am I like one of only a few non-white people running in our river valley here? Why?
That's a good question. Like, seriously.
I think this wouldn't happen if you were in like LA, but like, why here? Like, I noticed it when I'm at November Project, when I'm in different fitness communities. There's not a lot of non-white people, period. Like, you can look, like there's like a few Asians. You notice when there's like one or two black people. Like, you notice when there's people who are not white, because you look at each other. Any person who is not white will understand what I'm talking about, where when you scan a room when you walk into it and there's another non-white person, it doesn't matter what ethnicity they are, you just look at each other. You just do.
Yeah, it's like they know. It's like
you just do. You can't help it.
It's like bald guys looking at bald guys. Like, I get it. It's a thing. Like, people have their things.
Yeah, but I wanna have, and this is probably why I've texted a few cousins and family friends and all of this, because I'm trying to like understand like why are there, like, in terms of like diversity inclusion, like I was born and raised in this country and I had very forward thinking parents. Like, why aren't there a lot more of me running outside in the river valley?
So how are you going to impact change?
Just go out there. Honestly, you show up. Like, you know how cool it is to see. So I was a little conflicted about this, but it's pretty cool to see my photo on the wall at Lululemon, an international brand. Like, it was pretty cool that I was asked. I was really shy at first because, again, this goes back to like, I'd rather my work be the thing that's looked at, not me being the one that's looked at. And I'm also like, I'm not 21. Like, why does my photo need to be on a wall? But that's kind of a cool thing that I was recognized for I think a few things. It's kind of also hard to say, like, why do you think that? But I think it's awesome to see I can actually say that now. I'm trying to say the sentence. I think it's pretty awesome to see my photo on the wall at Lululemon, and I'm brown.
Yeah.
And I'm like a brown person, not a light-skinned brown person. I think that's important. It is an important thing. I don't look like a Bollywood star in terms of color of skin. I actually look like a normal colored brown person on the wall, and that's the way it is.
It's
period.
Important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever had an instance where you were in a circumstance and you said nothing at all and somebody just made an assumption? Like, without speaking, and somebody was like, they were ready to talk slower, or they were ready
to... Yeah, okay. I have a very specific example.
Here we go.
I was in grade 9. It was the beginning of grade 9, like the first 2 months. It was still fall time, so it was like September, October, November, sometime in the fall. Ontario falls are like, it's a long season. So sometime in the fall, I just started grade 9, which is the beginning of high school everywhere, I guess. Or not here. Anyways, in Ontario, high school starts in grade 9. So I was now going to a different school, is the whole point of this. So I'm going to a different school. It was about a 10-minute walk from my house. I wasn't with my older sister or my younger sister. Anyways, I was by myself walking home. And I lived in we lived in a very white, old white neighborhood. It was a great place to grow up. I really liked our neighborhood. Anyways, this is a very important distinction of why I mentioned that. So I was walking home from school. It was the first couple months, and it was probably about halfway home, so like a 5-minute walk in. And there was a really old couple raking their leaves. That's how I remember it was fall. They were raking their leaves, and they said, "Welcome." And they were like, "Welcome." I thought they were welcoming me to the neighborhood, to that school, because I had just finished grade 8 in a whole different school. And now I'm in a different part of the city, or a different part of the town that I lived in. I grew up in Richmond Hill, Ontario. And now I'm in a whole different place. And I thought they were welcoming me to the high school. So I said thanks. And they were lovely. They were being very nice and very kind and that kind of thing. It turns out, were welcoming me to Canada. And it didn't occur to me until it was only like a few minute exchange. But it didn't occur to me till like partway through that, oh my gosh, they're not saying like welcome to Richmond Hill High School. They're welcoming me to Canada because they think I'm new here. I had never experienced that before. I'm born and raised in Canada. Like, this is has anyone ever welcomed you to Canada? It's a weird thing. It's a weird thing. I mean, they weren't being mean. They weren't being malicious. They were like probably in their 80s, like, raking up their leaves. So they meant no harm by it, but it's a weird kind of assumption that I just let pass. I didn't want to embarrass them. They were nice, so I wasn't trying to embarrass them or anything like that. And you're just kind of stunned. I was also 13. I was in grade 9. However old you were in grade 9. So I was kind of stunned. Yeah. Yeah. It was a weird thing.
I understand that, like, loud and clear. I went to a rural school. The same thing would have happened. We didn't even have like a token black kid. We had a South Korean kid. That was our ethnic population, and we had our indigenous population, because like I went to school like close to Pigeon Lake, which is very accessible to a lot of local Indian reserves. Mm-hmm. And so like it's just going to happen. I wish it wouldn't, and I think it's important to advocate that people are people. I had an interview with his short form name is Thor, because I couldn't pronounce his Danish name, which is ironic. There's a segue to this, but first I'm going to get to the main point. He traveled the world. Like, he is traveling to every country in the world. He just has 9 left. He's stuck in Hong Kong right now, and he's doing it without going on a plane. So he was episode 99, if anybody's listening to this that wants to go back and check it out. But he's been doing this journey for 7 years. He's traveled to all the nations of Africa. He's traveled through the Middle East. He's traveled through like Asia. He's traveled through anywhere where you would think, oh no, that's different. Or like, oh, we can't go there. And 99% of the time, it's like, wow, that was like, they're very gracious hosts. They wanted to make sure that I have food. They were extremely welcoming. Like, it's a real smack in the face of perspective. That like, hey, like, give your head a shake, like, pay attention in social studies, like little things like that. There's so much rich history to Canada, in which like me as like a pasty white guy who has never been said, welcome to Canada. Like, why wouldn't I be welcome to Canada? I should be welcome to Canada. I don't like have the deepest roots to Canada, and so it's messed up. So that's why I talk about this on the podcast, because then people can like have that whole like check yourself before you wreck yourself. That whole moment where like, I should really give a bit more consideration into like who is being put up on the wall of my local store, and who is like how I am approaching people, how I am building my community. What does community look like? I had a really good conversation with Andrea Rice.
Oh yeah, she's a good friend.
We talked about like opening up community like in the bigger scheme of things, because we say community, but then we look at our community and we're like, is this community, or is this a bunch of white people and like a couple of brown people?
Are these like, people like me? Yeah.
Like, is it just confirmation bias?
Yeah.
And what I really liked, because we had a great visit was she challenged the word community in the sense that what we think is community, is it really? Or is it just like confirmation bias of what we deem to be community, what we're comfortable with now?
Yeah.
And then we're just looking for more of what we're comfortable with now.
For sure. So, you know, on that point, so yeah, it was about April last year when Lululemon approached me and said, would you be a brand ambassador for our company? It's kind of a big deal. And so it took me a little bit to think about it because like, I'm not 21. Do you want me to post all these photos of myself in fitness gear? Like I didn't quite know what it entailed. It was quite an honor to be asked, but I didn't know at first what that meant. Anyways, I said yes eventually once I understood more, and they wanted me to share what I do and how I do just the way I am right now. I didn't have to change anything about me, which at this age you don't really change for anyways, blah, blah, blah. It was very, very nice. And so one of the earlier conversations I had was around that. Like, I mean, I don't want to dwell on the point of like, why are there very few people, not no one, why are there very few people that look like me running in our river valley? There aren't a lot. And so that's a tricky thing, but I also wanted to broaden the conversation of, well, why, when I go to lots of fitness events, it doesn't matter. I don't need to like put it to, like attribute it towards a company or a group of people or, you know, a certain fitness community. That's not really what it is. Like everyone kind of looks the same. And that's not necessarily a fair thing to say, but when I look at other females, it's usually someone in their young or in their early 30s, blonde or brown ponytail, and they're generally relatively slim. And that's great. Like that's you know, one type of person or, you know, a few groups of people that live in our city. I'm like, but where's everybody else? Why am I not seeing like the Jamaicans who I know play cricket at Victoria? Like there's lots of Filipino people here who play basketball. So there is like people who are in the fitness space of other cultures and other ethnicities that make up the population of our Canadian city here. Like where are they? Like why am I not seeing them represented? And so I wanted to have a bigger conversation around that. Like, why are we not integrated from a health and wellness and fitness point of view in that way? Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm being unrealistic with even asking that question, but I'm starting to ask that question because it doesn't feel right to only see me running in the River Valley, which is it's a pretty easy way to access fitness running. Like you need a cool pair of running shoes that fit your feet. Doesn't matter how much they cost, like they fit your feet well.
Yeah, like I like that point that you make, and I'm gonna preface this by like saying like I'm not perfect, I'm a work in progress, but when I'm meeting like any new friend from any background, from any origin, I try to get better at listening and like really understanding, because like if you look at my circle of friends, it's like a rainbow of different ethnicity. It's pretty cool.
That's great. Yeah.
From like the outside in, if you were just to like line everybody up, it's really easy to assume that everybody follows like one set of values, or that everybody follows like one set of religious beliefs, or that half of them don't drink, half of them do drink. All these different things that are just super, super easy to assume. How many times do we actually stop to ask, or how many times do we actually stop to like put research into it? Like you see your friend wishing like a different holiday than what you celebrate. How many people actually put research into be like, well, what is the customs of this holiday, and how can I wish it back? Or like, what are they going to be doing that I don't understand, and how can I understand it better? Like there's so many things that are just, they're a big part of the identity of the people around me, and I would be naive to not look into that further. If I'm saying like these are my friends, how am I proving that if I'm just gonna be like, oh well, I mean like that's not what I do, so it doesn't really matter, you know? So I think, and like I say, I'm a work in progress. Like I am still working on that kind of stuff. But
that's a nice thing. That's a nice thing from an awareness point of view of yourself. Like it's nice. I mean, my parents say this a lot. Like this is the beauty of like being in this fabric of the Canadian culture. Like everybody comes from a different background. It doesn't matter if you came from another part of the world or you're moving from city to city. You come with a different cultural background. Like even moving from Toronto here, culturally there are differences. Like I know it seems like it's all the same, it's Canada, but it's not. It's like there are cultural differences. It's so awesome to like be part of this mosaic of somewhere different. And for yourself, what you're saying, like just being aware to learn about like different, it doesn't have to be just different cultures, different anything. Like we're a very diverse society, It's awesome to just be aware and learn about different things.
Well, I mean, like your morning routine versus my morning routine, your career background versus my career background. Like everything about somebody else can make each of us better.
Totally. I even had this so I grew up, my dad's side of the family is Muslim, and so I grew up with strong influences that way. So my dad is Muslim, my mom was raised Hindu, and they baptized us Roman Catholic. And so I grew up with literally everything in our house. So like we didn't sell it. Well, we celebrated Eid and all the fun stuff about it, but we knew a lot about that because you were exposed to it all the time. My mom is Hindu and her family is Hindu, so we celebrated a lot of Hindu festivals. We celebrate Diwali. Like that was a big part of our life growing up. And then we always had Christmas and like Easter and, you know, those kinds of holidays. And so it was interesting for me when I moved here, but more importantly after that, when I got married, I married a white person. My last name is now McKenzie. And even just being exposed to like the culture and cultural norms within my husband's family, like that was nothing that I grew up with. Value system, I would say, is very similar. Like that's part of what brought us together. But our upbringing and the way that even just being in my parents' house versus my in-laws' house, like it's so different. And so I know that might not seem like I think it would seem like a big deal. Like it's just something different than what you know. And maybe that's back to the point that originally that got us on this thread of like thinking about your biases. Like we all have them, right? And not everybody's the same. Just because you can't see what's in their head or what's in their body, like we're not all the same. We come, we arrive, we show up every single day, like so different.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like when you talk about your experiences in Canada, I'll give you a little snippet of my experience when I went to Denmark one time, because I have distant relatives in Denmark. I don't know very much to any Danish. I know how to say like cozy, hyggelig.
What's
so
that?
That's a thing.
What does that mean?
So like hyggelig is like the sense of making cozy. I think that's the direct translation.
Okay.
So you light candles, you make tea, you get a warm blanket, you light the fire. And that's like a custom for them based on like their weather is very similar to Canada, just like a lot of cold, a lot of rainy, a lot of dark. And so it's like a cultural thing.
How do you spell that? I actually think I read about that last year.
Well, there's HYGGE, and that's like the equivalent of like hug.
Yeah,
so
I totally have heard this.
Yeah, and then I forget how to spell like the longer hyggelig version, but it's like it's such a common custom. Like there's books about it. There's products selling it, all that stuff. So I went to Denmark for the first and only so far time ever in like 2010, and at that time I had hair, so that was the thing. And it was fairly blonde and green eyes, walking around, didn't say a word. People everywhere are speaking Danish to me. And not every time, but like 90% of the time. If I looked awkward, they would speak English. But if I was just like walking around like I would walk around, they would default to Danish. And it's just like, that's perspective that people need, is to understand like sometimes people are just going to look and assume. And we're all doing it. It's just we're not all in like that contrasted situation where we're put in that position to be like, oh, you know?
Right,
like,
yeah.
A lot of people never experience that equivalent.
I've had that exact experience, I have to say. In 2006 and 2007 in the summertime, I went to India. So 2006, I was there on a volunteer experience that I found myself. It was the summer before I moved here. And I went on a volunteer excursion with World Literacy of Canada, and they're based in Toronto and then in Varanasi, India. And I look Indian to people. I am not from India. My family is from Guyana and South America. But I'm of East Indian descent. Clearly, I look Indian, right? And so I had the same experience you did. So I went to India for the first time. In that first year, I was volunteering. So I was living at a center, the World Literacy of Canada Center, and then we got paired off. There was 9 of us, 8 from Toronto and 1 guy from Calgary or Red Deer. I can't remember. I didn't even know where Red Deer was at that time. Being from Toronto, I didn't know that. So that was the summer of 2006, and then in the summer of 2007, I decided I wanted to go back to India. I had a very amazing experience, and I wanted to go back to India for the summer to do my internship for the MBA. And so I got to go, and I stayed with family friends of ours, family friends that I grew up with in Toronto. Their family lived in India still, so I went and stayed with them. So I had 2 totally different experiences. One was fairly rural. I was living with a host family, and the second one I was staying with family friends in Delhi, living like a very interesting life, very, very interesting life that second time. But both times I had a very similar experience. Like, I look Indian and people start speaking Hindi to me and I'm like, I have no idea what you're saying.
Yeah,
Not a clue in the world.
Well, I mean, it's more likely to happen. Well, I don't know. It's tough. I guess it just depends on the setting that we're in. But because there's so much more diversity in anybody that's any shade of brown, like, there's going to be a lot more possible language that a person can assume. Anytime that I've traveled to Hawaii, I've had one of my Filipino friends with me, and they get mistaken as like a local, and which is great because we get like the local shopping deals, and I like me just strolling around in Hawaii in places where like white people have bought up land and kind of like messed up the natives of Hawaii's like their space. They're not too happy to see me with my like touristy Hawaii tattoo and like, oh, one of these guys, hey?
Yeah.
But when I have my Filipino friends, it's like my safety blanket. But there is some language crossover where they can basically there's a lot of crossover between a lot of languages, similar to how like if I'm learning any aspect of Danish, then I can understand a little bit of Norwegian.
Right. Yeah.
So that is helpful, but from putting that aside, like there's no, they weren't born in Hawaii, they don't have relatives in Hawaii, but they go to Hawaii and they're welcomed home.
Yeah.
That's
interesting.
I wasn't born in Denmark. I have relatives in Denmark, but like I wouldn't have known if not for they actually are my relatives in Denmark tracked us down through like a network of libraries.
Oh, so you didn't know them growing up?
So like my heritage from there is my mom's dad, and he passed away when he was like 51. So my mom was still young, and then so several years later, then I was born. So I never had any connection to Danish heritage before they finally tracked us down through like, I think they had a connection in the States who got connected with a local museum who finally got connected to us, and then we've been able to visit back and forth, and I'm connected to them in social media.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So just crazy. And
you didn't have like cousins there growing up, like you're now connected, or like, I mean, some time ago, but you're connected. I find that fascinating.
Well, it's super cool because then today, like, I am connected to a bunch of second cousins who are like close in age, close in interest. Like, I've got a Danish physiotherapist, Danish personal trainer, like lots of people doing the similar things, similar experiences, and we can kind of keep tabs on each other on Instagram. I think sometimes they listen to the podcast, and like, if not for globalization, this would not happen. Like,
does anybody look like you? Or look like your family here?
I'm sure that
like some features?
I have characteristics that make it easy to identify aspects of my heritage, but I'm just a melting pot of just white. We got some like Scottish, Irish, English, Welsh, Danish.
Right, yeah.
And so it'd be interesting to do one of those like surveys where you spit in the cup and mail it in, or whatever you have to do.
Yeah.
Just to kind of see if there's any kind of a blip in there.
I would love to find it. So I tried when I went to India, I think it was the second time in the summer of 2007. I was doing my internship. I think it was that year. I can't remember for sure if it was that year or the first year. But it was the first year. It was the first. Sorry, who cares? It doesn't matter. So I remember seeing in my mind people that I thought looked like relatives of mine, not my immediate family, like not my mom and my dad and my sisters, looked like our extended family. I saw a few people that reminded me of like a cousin, an uncle, like random people. So why would I even connect these people who were not like my immediate family, right? And so it made me think, I'm like, I wonder if this is the part of India that our family's from. Like, I don't know. Like, is the food similar enough? Like, maybe some of that was crossed over like generations later to Guyana. Like, maybe, I don't know. But then I heard that I could get, it was the first year for sure, because I was looking for this. It was a PIO card, a person of Indian origin card that you could get. I should Google this. That was 2006. I've never looked it up since then. To see, like, could I get this card? Because I wanted to go back the next year, which was 2007. Could I find this person? Could I get this visa? Because then I didn't need to get a visa to get into India, which is what you need, or at least needed at that time. And so I was trying to like trace my family. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was the closest link. but people, like, there was no proper records of, like, that was under British rule at that time, so I imagine his name would have been on, like, an official record somewhere. But who did he come with? When did he come? How old was he? Did he have a birth certificate? Like, any, like, documentation? I couldn't find that as I started asking, like, some of my older aunts and uncles. And one aunt that was, I don't know if she, like, was she curious to ask some of these questions too? I don't know. But anyways, I never found the answer. I never got the PIO card. I still paid the visa and off I went again. This is one thing I find very, very fascinating about Indigenous culture, of, like, orally passing your history and your family origins down. I think that's amazing. And I probably appreciated it more as I was going through that, trying to find out where's our family from, moving from India to Guyana, and now most of our family lives in Toronto, actually. Between Toronto, New York, and Florida, there's a lot of, like, my family and both sides of my family. But kind of moving around the world that way, we don't have that same oral or strong oral history. Indigenous people do.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, it's something
it's
that
so purposeful, passing that down.
I reflect on it sometimes in the sense that, like, just because I don't have a definable, like, single culture of sorts, like, just because I'm a dynamic of multiple things does not mean I have to stomp down somebody else's thing. So when the Indigenous girl was singing the national anthem at the Oilers game, I was like, yeah, that's good, because that inspires other people to fight for their identity.
Yeah. And
it's a huge part of Canada. Like, it's Canada. I mean, it's something greater than Canada, really, at the end of the day.
That's
like,
so important.
We've gone on such a cultural tangent here.
I just think, I mean, this goes back to an earlier point, like, this, we celebrated this growing up, like, learning about other people's cultures in the house that I grew up in was very important. That was a value system in my house growing up. Like, and the biggest way that showed up, just because this is what we all like to do, we all like to eat in our house. So the biggest way we learned about other people's cultures is learning about their food.
Yeah.
So when I don't know, maybe it was like in university or later in life, like, I feel like I had a lot of cultural fluency when it came to food, because I just grew up not eating just, like, Indian food. Like, I grew up eating everything. Yeah, I think that's just so important. That's a nice way to celebrate, like, the amazing parts of everybody's culture that make up where we live. And we're so lucky to live where we live.
Yeah, I've been accidentally creating ethnic traditional dishes lately.
That's awesome.
Like, I put lentils in my rice, and I've been told that that's a thing, and I'm like, what?
That's from many parts of the world.
Oh, yeah.
Rice and beans, that's from many, many, many different parts of the world.
There's rice and beans, but then there's, like, red lentils in rice.
Yeah.
And it's, from tons of different parts of the world, but I just thought I was being smart and getting more protein. That is honestly what I thought. And then I put it in my Instagram story, and Farah actually messaged me, and she was like, I always knew you were brown at heart. And I was like, well, I mean, like, yeah, I got a big piece of...
Middle Eastern people do that, Indian people do that, South Americans do that. Like, this is, like, I bet lots of different cultures in Africa do that. I know for sure that they do.
Well, if you go to Costa Rica, then it's, like, brown beans.
Totally.
And rice. So, yeah, absolutely.
There's so many different versions of, like, rice and beans.
But typical white guy would not be just default to, oh, well, where's my lentils at? Gotta mix those in the rice. Like, seriously, I know no other white guy who just, like,
I can pop,
on a whim.
I'm like, I could pull it out of my fridge right now.
Well, there you go. It takes some coaxing for most other people, but I just on my own free will decided that's what I was going to do one day, and I seem to continue to do
that's
it. And
perfect.
I just think it's neat.
Yeah, that's great.
I think, like, if we put out one message in our episode, it's honestly just, as a person listening to this, like, get to know other people better. Like, figure out what you don't know. Don't just assume what you don't know. Figure out what you don't know. Ask more questions. Listen better. Get to know other people's, like, traditions, beliefs, and holidays and stuff. Because, like, in, like, a selfish way, we get so much more personal growth. Our life is open up so much more. We learn more about ourselves, because we talked about how we would source out the standpoints of others to see our skills and what we are good at. Well, what if we just dissected that out? Like, we don't have as big of a scope of people to tell us what we are skilled at.
Yeah.
If we are not open to getting to know this big plethora of people. Because, like, if we looked at the statistics of our city that we are in right now, it is extremely, extremely multicultural.
Very multicultural. It is. More so than I thought when I first arrived here in 2006. It's very, very diverse.
And
I just
think
different.
What part of the city you're in either. Like,
yeah,
granted,
exactly.
There's going to be the little pockets, but if you go to the grocery store, you're going to find like probably 30 different cultures at any given time.
Yeah, why wouldn't you? Like we all live in the city. We all have to go buy food. Of course you would.
Well, I mean, like that's evident. That makes sense.
Yeah.
We all got to survive, but it's just so cool that we're all coexisting, but then we're forgetting. We're like, oh, I could actually better myself by seeing what this person is all about and why they do what they do.
Yeah.
Like, people aren't going to do something because it's more difficult inherently.
Yeah.
They're going to do something because that's how they perform at their best. So why would I not ask what they're doing that makes them perform so well? Because they are making up the population that are the high performers. Like, every so often I'll look back on previous guests. Like, I make a conscious effort to do equal male and female, and sometimes I have to play some catch up.
Mm-hmm.
And I do make a conscious effort to create some diversity in it, so I have to play a lot of catch up with that because I'm aware of my past guests, and it requires a lot of reaching out, a lot of searching. But I wouldn't be a podcast without bias if I wasn't working on like reducing that bias.
Oh, for sure. And it goes all ways, right? Like, it doesn't. I mean, everybody does this. First and foremost, you kind of reach to people who are closest to you, which are generally, not always, but like people who are like you and look like you and like hopefully not think like you. Like, that's the nice thing about having diverse friendships or, you know, diverse people around you, even in a work context. Like, that's really nice. But I have to do that. Everybody has to do that. Like, I consciously have to go and reach out to someone who's not like me too.
Well, in the personal trainer industry, and you might recall some of this from your experience, but it's just like we have like our professionals that we follow, and then we have our peers that also follow that person.
Yeah.
And then it's just this big echo chamber. It's like, yeah, listen what they say. Yeah, they're right. Like, that's how you deadlift. Yeah. Well, you have to diversify in that sense too.
Yeah.
Because you can't just listen to the person that says this is how you do it. You have to apply that in the gym, and you have to formulate the reason for yourself. And you can't just say that's not how you do it, because you have to try it.
Yeah.
Or else you can't say that's not how you do it because you don't know why it's not how you do it. You can't just blindly follow the opinions of one person when you're dealing with people that they will never deal with.
For sure.
Like, each of us are going, as if you're working in fitness, if you're working with any kind of a people business, we're going to amass a selection of people that is very different to what the people that we listen to get. And so if we do not apply what we're learning in a very unique sense, then we are not doing our due diligence.
Yeah.
We're not serving the purpose of, we are working with individuals. We are not doing like this cookie cutter template and applying it to our people just as they did to theirs.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I think
like
that's important.
One long-winded statement.
No, it's good. I'm in agreement.
Awesome. And so I'm going to try and like wrap this up because we've gone on for quite a while.
Look how easily we chat.
It's easy. Flawless. Easy. I would have to ask, with your experience as a personal trainer, how long were you doing that for, first of all?
Yeah, so I was 23. That was a long time ago. It was 2003. That's how old I am. So it was 2003, and it was probably just under 3 years. So I had my undergrad in school was a kinesiology health science undergrad at York University. And I took a little bit of a sidestep. I will totally share this because I bet a lot of people have been through this. So I finished university just like a lot of people do, and you're like, what the hell am I going to do now with my life? Like, I have no idea what I'm going to do now. And I had spent a lot of time through university years, like shadowing a chiropractor, going in, like I got to go spend a one full shift with a paramedic, like on an ambulance, like full 12 hours, like it was crazy. I shadowed a physiotherapist for months, actually. I went and volunteered at a clinic. So I've done sort of stuff in that space to say, like, what might I be interested in, and got to go and learn. And this was, again, a little bit of push from my parents to, why don't you go and learn what's out there? Like, it's one thing to go to school, but, like, whatever, who cares? It's just school. Like, you have to actually go and experience something that's real after that. And so chiropractic was something that I was interested in. Yeah. So anyways, there's a number of things that I potentially was interested in. And I finished university just like a lot of people. And I was like, I have no idea what I want to do now. And I was panicked. I remember handing in my last exam at university. And I was so excited. I handed it in to the professor and I walked out of the room and I just like was taken over with dread. And I was like, I have no idea what I want to do now. And I'm sure a lot of young people at this age or at that age can relate to that. Like, I don't know what I want to do. Lots of people do have some clue what they want to do, but I just didn't. And I remember going home and my mom had made I think she'd made like a special lunch. I was 22. I was still living at home. I'd just driven back and forth to university. And there, my parents had a nice bouquet of flowers and all this like, yay, you're done kind of stuff. And that was great. But I remember I went and took a nap and I was just filled with dread. Like, I have no idea what I'm going to do. And I actually took a very weird sidestep. I actually moved to Trinidad and Tobago and I started med school. I'm not doctor material. Like, I think you need to be extremely detail oriented and methodical and all these kinds of things. And perhaps I am for things that I'm interested in. But I have a big picture strategy kind of brain. Doctor is not my brain. Anyway, so off I went. I didn't have to write the MCATs, which you would have written long before you finished university. And I went to University of the West Indies, which one campus was in Trinidad and Tobago. And I lasted like a semester, like literally not even a semester. I ended up just partying. I did what lots of young people do. I just had fun. I just partied. And I came home at the end of that semester. And this is not a very proud moment for brown parents. Like, they're all, especially my mother, like, my daughter's going to be a doctor. This is another very big cultural norm. Your kid needs to be a doctor or a lawyer or engineer or something where you can like hold up to the rest of your family. Like, my kid is something, because only 3 or 4 professions make it, right? I'm totally just joking. but that's not quite a joke. That's a cultural norm. And so I came home and I wallowed for a couple months because I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. And I remember it was actually my brother-in-law, my older sister's husband. He's very important in my life, but we had this family meeting. We had to sit down and have a little intervention with me when I was 22 or 23, I think, at that time, or 22, turning 23, I can't remember. And we had to have this little family intervention of like, what am I going to do? And like, what are some steps in front of me? And my brother-in-law was like very, very instrumental. He was like, just go do something, like get some experience. Like, you finished school, like whoop-de-doo. I mean, that's an achievement, I guess, but I was like, who cares? You finished school, go do something. And so that conversation was important to me because it was like, okay, like literally go do something. Like, I had lots of part-time jobs, like that kind of thing. I had 2 part-time jobs through university. So like, I knew how to be in a job. But that was an important conversation to me. And then I actually, shortly after that, I started a small personal training business. Because I was like, well, this is the thing I know how to do. I had, done some of that in university. And I mostly, I started a pre- and postnatal fitness training business. And so I was attached to two fitness facilities. One was in Richmond Hill where I lived, and one was sort of midtown Toronto. And the point of being attached to both of those was to like build experience, build skill set, get some experience working in a facility like that, working with clients. Like, what are you offering to them? Like, what does training actually look like? So I got to learn some of that. And then from that, I got a lot of referrals. So I bought a car. I bought my first car. I didn't buy my first car. I was gifted my first car. That was very nice. But I bought a small suitcase and I bought equipment. Just, like stuff you can put in a suitcase, and then you can like take it client to client, take it to their house. And so I got a lot of referrals out of that, and I built a small training business that was probably a 3-year journey for me, close to a 3-year journey. And yeah, it's like, you know what that life is like. You're kind of working at 5 a.m. till about 9 or 10, and then you have a little hour or 2 of break. Then there's some lunchtime clients, and then after work all the way till 8 or 9 or 10, probably 9 for me. And I was moving around all over the city, all over like the GTA Toronto, which is like big. It's not like driving around 20 minutes here, which is easy. So I had to kind of figure out that business model. What did that look like? And in that journey of figuring out like, what does the business model look like getting paid hourly is typically like, especially if you work in one place, that's typically what the model is. But what does it look like when you're moving all over the city and there's like an hour of dead time because you're traveling to someone's house? Like, you should be compensated for that time. So I had to figure that out. I did figure that out. And in that time, that's when a family friend of mine, the same family whose family I stayed with in India, so the piece of their family that's in Toronto were neighbors of ours in the early 80s. They were the only other brown family that lived in our neighborhood. That's how we became friends. and our families are still friends today, which is great. But the father of that family, he was very instrumental in my life. Still, I give him a ton of credit. He was really important in my life in terms of seeing like, okay, she's got a brain and she's trying to figure out a business model here. She's great working with clients. Like there's a few things he would say. The biggest thing he would say to me is like, you're really good at giving, like you always hold eye contact with people, and that's really important in business. And he would say that over and over and over to me, but that was pivotal in my life. Having someone recognize some kind of potential in me and say, you should go do your MBA. And that changed my life. That conversation was the day after my older sister's wedding. So it was like it was May 2015. It was like, go do your MBA. And here's some of the reasons why I think you should go do this. So if you want to learn more about like how do you create a business out of this, great. Go do that MBA and figure that out as you're going and doing this. And the trajectory of my life has, like, I can't even tell you how much it has changed from that one conversation post sister's wedding to where my life is today. But that was really important, figuring out how do I create some of this business model around training, which I loved. I loved it. It was like pre and postnatal fitness training. Like I worked with a lot of new moms I got to work with, which was really great. Yeah, it was important to learn the business model behind that, but that conversation was pivotal in changing my life.
Well, I like that you talk about conversation, because like we talked about this before, like with the volume of conversations that I've had and the amount that it's shaped who I am. Like anybody that's curious, like go to episode 1, listen how I talk. Go to episode 100, listen how I talk.
For sure.
Like you can actually see it in the episode, and just how I talk to people, what I get out of the conversation, and just amass your own journey of self-growth by going through those conversations.
Yeah.
Or have conversations of your own. You don't need to listen to me talk. Have your own conversations. Schedule coffee with people. It's such an important thing that actually going and being in connection with people face to face on a regular basis is, like, I think social media makes us think that we got it checked off, but we don't.
I'm so glad I didn't grow up in a time of social media. Yeah, it's a very different thing. Sorry, I said 2015, that was 2005. Like the person who I was then in 2005 was, as you say, like from the beginning of this to now, and we're not talking like, we are talking a couple years, but we're not talking like a decade of your life. Like think how differently your brain has grown and evolved like 10 years ago to now. Like I would say too that's a 15-year journey for me, 2005 to now, but how different my brain works and how I think and have grown so differently from then to now. Part of it is just age, but part of it is what have you done in those years to grow yourself.
And also how you've leaned into your tough times.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure, like, at the end of the day, we could probably have a second episode full of, like, tough times that you've
100%.
had.
You know what? You know what my husband calls me? Whenever I say something that's like, oh, I'm having, it's kind of difficult, he calls me tough time. He's like, oh, tough time. That's what he calls me. So we could have a whole episode on this.
Does that make, like, where did that stem from with
I don't know.
tough time?
No, he's just joking. Like, he has 5 million nicknames for me, but one of them is like, oh, tough time.
I like it.
It's just a little joke.
What are your 3 favorite things about him?
About my husband? Oh, there's so many. 3's not enough. I like how open he is, like just how his brain works. Like he's just open to anything. And this is part of the cultural limitation I was kind of referring to before, where certain cultures like limit themselves. Being married to a white person, this is going to sound silly, but he doesn't have that. I don't know if it's just his family or just like he just never had those limitations. So he just thinks really big and can hear anything. And even if it's contradictory to what he thinks, he'll hear it, and he's open to like having a conversation. So the openness is something I really, really dig about him. He's had a lot of experiences in his life. He traveled on and off for not quite a decade, but almost a decade. So when most people like finish high school and go to university and go get a job and those kinds of things, he did none of those things. And as a result, he's a very, very fascinating person. And I think he's the most interesting person I've ever met. He has really great stories all the time. So literally, if you sit down and chat with him, it's like story time with Uncle Casey. And his name's Casey. He did a lot of like real travel. So he would travel for like 15 months at a time. And this was like pre-internet. So how did his parents know where he was?
How did he take selfies?
For sure, exactly. He like wrote actual letters home.
Oh my goodness.
And made like actual collect phone calls. Some people listening don't even know what those things are.
Did he talk to people face to face instead of through his phone?
He's just so interesting. So that would be number 2. And I think that's sort of what shaped maybe point 1 that I made of just being so open. He's experienced so many cultures. So, you know, back to one of our earlier points about talking about that, like he's traveled everywhere. He spent a lot of time in the Middle East, which he really enjoys. He lived in Costa Rica for 6 months. He spent a long time in India. He tried to do a bike trip from Turkey, from Istanbul to Delhi. He tried to do a bike, would have taken like 15 months. 9/11 happened in that time, so we didn't get to go and do that big, huge, epic trip. But yeah, he's very interesting, and I think it's cultural experiences over almost a decade has shaped a lot of his thinking. And he's very loving. He's the most loving person I know. He just accepts me for me. He doesn't care what color my brown skin is. He doesn't care where my family's from. He doesn't care about all of those things that culturally people tend to care about. Some people listening might know what I'm talking about. They certainly do. My white guy doesn't care about any of those things. He just loves me for me, and he's very loving. Doesn't matter.
Awesome.
Yeah. Doesn't matter what I've said. He still loves me, even if I've said something not great to him. Those are my top 3.
I like it.
Yeah.
So the last and final question for this episode is, if you could give one piece of advice to someone on how to live their life to the fullest in the most true to themselves way, what would that piece of advice be?
Oh, this is new. This is coming new to me. I have a good thing. I think it's a good thing. So from those health challenges I talked about, I only mentioned one of them, but there's a lot that happened in 2017. I've done a lot of, this has sort of been one of those like character building moments in my life the last few years. There's been lots of other points in my life too. But the last few years in particular has been that. And in that time, when you don't have your health, you literally have nothing else. It's eye-opening to like realize like, wow, I'm not invincible. I know we know that, but until like you've crumbled a little bit, you don't really know that. So having to kind of build myself back up, I've done a lot of personal growth as well as like physically getting better. And the last couple years, if there's some people listening to this that know me will know what I'm about to say, or can maybe think about what I'm about to say, is that I think it's important to think what is important for your long-term health and happiness. And what I mean by that is thinking about what is essential for you. So I will share this. I've shared this a couple times. I was gifted a book last year from Lululemon called Essentialism by Greg McKeown.
Do
you know that book? Oh, it's such a good book.
Yeah.
Okay, so that to me is probably step 2 in this journey. So as I started this, so let me back up actually. I'm a little out of order. So I went through this journey, started going through like some personal growth stuff. And one of the first things I did, and I don't know what made me do this, maybe because I had time, as I said, it was like 6 to 8 months of like get better. I didn't really work a ton in that period of time. I went down this minimalism journey. And so, have you heard of the minimalists?
Yep.
Okay, so I started following those guys, and I started once, 3 times I ended up doing it, but I did the minimalism challenge, and that's a 30-day minimalism challenge. You get rid of one thing on day 1, day 2, 2 things, day 3, 3 things, and so on. By the time you get to the 20s, it's hard. Like 21, day 21, get rid of 21 things, day 22, right? And in about a year and a half, I did that challenge 3 times. I got from this condo that you're sitting in right now over 1,500 items, because I actually went a little further, but I got rid of a ton of stuff, like lots of stuff like this. You only need 2 of these. You don't need 20 of these little dishes to put your tea bag in.
Yeah.
So I got rid of like stuff from every corner of this place. And that for me was not just about stuff. That was like such a shift in mindset of like what is actually important in your life. And for me, that was thinking around my health and happiness, and particularly my health. I think that's broadened a lot now, but I have to think about that forever. And step 2 was reading this book last year, and spending time between, like what does that minimalism journey look like, and what is essential to my life. And I think that together, those things, like what makes you who you are, and what is not just your purpose. That sounds so cliche, but like what's important to you moving forward. And that can evolve and change, but it's not everything. It's a few things. Like when you hear the word priorities and you see like 15 things on a list, that's not a priority list. Like there's 2 things that are 1 thing that should be on a priority list. So I think kind of narrowing it down and figuring out like what is important to you for whatever your reasons are. Mine was health and happiness, but it can be whatever it is to you, but narrowing it down, because I think our lives get very clouded with like, I gotta go to work and the kids' soccer and I gotta make cupcakes for so-and-so and I have to go to this and I have to, you have to be part of all of this networking event and so on and so forth. And then it just gets clouded and you get clogged up and like what's actually important. And I think a lot of people, and maybe this is this day and age, I was just listening to a podcast talking about lack of sleep. Ariana Huffington was talking about lack of sleep. And it's because we're so clouded by a lot of these things. So how do you sort of remove some of that and pick whatever is important to you? Everyone has their own personal reasons, and do that. And that will evolve, of course, but do that.
Yep.
That's what I would say. That was a long answer.
That was a good answer.
There you go.
And like, I just recently went through that book. I listened to it on audiobook like 3 times. I read it once.
It's good.
It's really good, and it's really important if there's any like trainers or just like people that are starting out in their career listening to this. And I'll tell you from my perspective is like, I consider myself a beginner all the time. And so with that being said, my business is not in completion. It is a work in progress. I could be more full of things to do, but I'm being particular in the things that I do. So my schedule could be full of like different group classes. I could go contract at different places here and there and everywhere, or I could focus on the things that give me the most fulfillment, trust the process, work on it, put my heart into things like this podcast. Like,
yeah.
The things that make me feel fulfilled take precedent over the things that put money in my bank account, with the delicate balance of making sure that I survive.
Of course.
Because like,
yeah.
even if we are not like wealthy from the start, A, wealth does not equal happiness, and B, if you do something, anything for a long enough time, you'll get to where you want to be.
Oh, for sure. You absolutely will. And we are wealthier than most of the world. Like, we are very, very, very lucky where we live in this privileged place of both of us. Like, we just, we just are. But not to minimize your point, because your point is really important. But yeah, no, I agree with both of those. Those are important things.
This has been a woke episode. Like, we really lit it up today.
We did. I mean, we did.
Yeah.
Thank you for this. That was great. It was nice to share.
Yeah, thanks for joining me.
And nice to meet you for the first time at my kitchen table.
Yeah.
If you want to support the Lifestyle Chase, the best way to do that right now is to share. Share the living shit out of this podcast. Put it in your Instagram story, tell a friend, promote it on social media. And so it's all about building momentum to help make people a bit more resilient in life, inspire others, share the stories of people who you may look up to. I'm sure tons of you have a very special place for Lazina in your heart. And there's probably a lot of past guests who you hold in a high regard. Their story is helping other people. I see the listens. I see how often some of these episodes get listened to. And I understand how helpful it can be to hear a story a few times. So as you share, it helps others. Thank you for your support. It means a lot. Have a good one.